one told me about him, how people cry. Well, it's too late to say you're sorry. How would I know? Why should I care? Please don't bother trying to find him. He's not there. Well, let me tell you about the way he looks, the way he acts, and the color of his hair. His voice is soft and good, his eyes are clear and bright, but he's not there.
Welcome back. This is Dave Tubman. I'm the author of the book Jimmy Hoffa Is Missing-The Gap, and I'll be moderating this channel for you. And I'm going to be covering Chapter 4, which is the Tubman timeline and the route that they took the day of July 30th, 1975. And then later we'll be going over the comparison between the timelines, Hoffa, O'Brien, and the Tubmans, and comparing what Chuckie really did that day. After that, I'm going to also dig into Chuckie's timeline. There was so much content there that is up for question that I'd like to help sort that out for you. So please subscribe, like, share, and follow, but let as many people know as you can, because as I said before, you just won't see this anywhere else. Chapter 4, Part 1, where I introduce the Tubman timeline. It's July 30th, 1975, The Family Secret. This is a third timeline, and again, you haven't heard this from anywhere else. If you've read the book, you know about it. And I'll try not to repeat myself very much, because I've told you basically the whole story at this point. But just to give you an idea of the evidence that I used, again, I used my parents' evidence and went out from there. So everything I read in the Hoffa report tended to corroborate everything that they said they saw. But there's things not in the Hoffa report because the FBI had no idea that somebody saw this car after it left the Red Fox. That's the end of the trail for them. So this continues the trail, I believe, to the point where Hoffa is murdered at the end of this trail, this part of the trail. And his remains, in my opinion, are also signaled by what the Tubmans saw. So I was living with them in their townhome at 36643 Woodward Avenue. At the time it was still Bloomfield Township, but it has since become Birmingham. So it was in the same town as the Machus Red Fox at the time, about 10 minutes away, 10-15 minutes at the most. But they're half a mile north of 15 Mile or Maple. And the Red Fox was located at Maple and Telegraph. So they were getting ready that morning to go that afternoon to Helen, my sister's house in Westland. And so they were packing the car for this 2-night trip, and they were fairly busy, but kind of looking at the clock. They knew they wanted to be there by 4 o'clock, and their normal route of travel was down Woodward Avenue, Maple, go west, go to Telegraph, head south on Telegraph. And then they would take that all the way due south to Ford Road or Michigan Ave, depending on which one they decided to take, and then go west again over to Helen's residence. So they were getting ready to go on this trip, and when my mom told me, as far as timing, all she remembers is the last time she looked at the clock, it said 2:15. So they left shortly after that. I think she said they put a couple of more items in the car and left. So he's driving the car, my mom's the passenger, both in the front seat, and they head off to my sister's house. So as they turned and head south on Telegraph Road, my dad hugs the number 4 lane next to the median. As it turns out, it was closer to 245 that they actually are passing by the Machus Red Fox after turning onto Telegraph, headed south. When my dad's driving the car, he's in the number 4 lane next to the median. My mom's in the passenger seat. Out of the corner of her eye, she sees a big maroon-colored either a Lincoln, she said. She didn't know it was a Mercury. And the movement, though, the erratic movement is what caught her eye, comes tight up against their bumper in the number 4 lane. And she's kind of wondering what's going on there, but she doesn't think much until it pulls right up next to her window in the number 3 lane. And the driver is staring at her. And I don't know if the driver recognized my dad from Darby's or somewhere. Maybe, well, he worked at Darby's. Or why he was looking. That just doesn't make sense. So the maroon car pulls right up next to my mom's window, Frances's window. She's looking, and the thing that caught her eye now is the driver is just staring at her and glaring, she said, at the car, looking at the car up and down, looking at her, and he's full front. And my dad recognizes him. He says, "Frances," he says, "quit looking." She says, "Well, there's something going on over there," and because she had looked over, something caught her eye in the back seat. She said, "There's a lot of commotion in the back seat." And what she had seen was 2 men, and both of them had their knees jammed up into their chin, and one man closest to her had a leash or rope in his hand, fighting with something. She thought it might have been a dog, since he was holding a strap of some sort. She said, "Well, they're holding a dog down in the back seat." She says, "Something's going on." He says, "That's the mafia, quit looking." So that just made her look even more intense, of course. So that this goes on for a little bit. The Mercury pulls back. My dad's, not knowing what's going on yet. Neither one feels scared, but they're a little confused. Why Chuckie O'Brien? He says, when they pull up again, "That's Chuckie O'Brien, quit looking. You want to end up in the Detroit River?" So she says she tried not to look, but she couldn't help it. Chuckie O'Brien is staring at them again, and they're driving side by side. This goes on for a period of 12 to 15 minutes and 5-mile travel down Telegraph Road between 15 Mile and 10 Mile. My dad finally says, "I'm going to get away from this car." He slows down intentionally, lets the car speed up, pulls ahead of him in the number 4 lane, and then turns left, goes across Telegraph Road. And my dad knows it's the Raleigh house because he was hired to manage it in 1974. So he knows that's the Raleigh house. So the timing, and I know I'm going to have a map up next to me here, but the car pulls behind the Raleigh house to the southeast corner, and it's sticking out when it stops about 2/3 of the way. By that time, it's only about 150 feet as far as the visibility distance from the number 4 lane where the Tubman's car is at, looking across Telegraph to the back of the Raleigh house. That's 150 feet. Then they see right next to where the car came to a stop, they know it's the same car, it was well exposed. They see a Detroit City garbage truck facing Telegraph, driver still seated in the driver's seat. And my dad knows it's a Detroit City garbage truck from servicing Darby's. So that would have been a Tri-County truck in '74, though it became a Central Sanitation, which, of course, as I've said, was owned by Peter Vitale and Jimmy Quasarano. So this truck is sitting there. It's just a garbage truck. It's not a bin hauler. The service for the Raleigh house is on Fridays, and this was a Wednesday afternoon. But the bin for the Raleigh house is 8 foot by 8 foot by 20 feet long, all enclosed. The only way you can get at it is from inside the banquet hall. So I'm going to say it's 3 o'clock by now, and it's another 45 minutes to an hour to my sister's house. Later I confirmed with my sister that they arrived a little bit before 4. So this is perfect match to their time frame, my sister's account. I've also recorded my phone call with her, which I never made until 2020. So this is going to drift into August 1st when, which I cover on page 65 is the start of chapter 4, part 2. Jimmy Hoffa is missing, August 1, 1975, the realization. The Tubmans went on to my sister's house on the 30th. And my mom had talked to my sister a bit about seeing the Mafia on the way over. They didn't see Hoffa, of course. He would have been on the floorboard in the back seat. But they did tell my sister about that while they're waiting for John to show. And then they went on to their trip in Lake Pinckney, pulling a camper. So hopefully you were able to dismiss every rumor you heard at this point. There are no rumors if you're real time back on the 30th, 31st, and August 1st. You haven't heard any of these rumors yet. Now the first breaking news comes out. My mom and dad are with my sister at Lake Pinckney. My dad gets his usual morning paper, and he sees the headlines, Jimmy Hoffa is missing, in the Detroit Free Press, and his last seen at restaurant. She was getting ready to go back after 2 nights at Lake Pinckney. And on the morning they were going to leave, which was Friday morning, August 1st, she's packing up the camper, and she sees my parents sitting at the table nearby. And she also sees folded over part of the headline, Hoffa Missing. So apparently it was folded where that was the part of the headline she could see. And she did overhear them talking. She said they were talking cautiously or something where they didn't want other people to hear, but she heard my dad say, well, what do you think we saw, to my mother, Frances? And Frances says, oh, a big dog or something? And my dad says, no, that was no dog. And so my sister remembers that, didn't delve into it. She said she sloughed it off and went on about packing up to go home. I hear the story, but not until they come home the same day to the townhome, and I'm there. As soon as they walked in, they approached the TV, turned it on. My mom sat in her seat. My dad was kind of standing and pacing, but I'm in the same living room. It's a small townhome. Downstairs is just living room and kitchen. So we're sitting there, and the news is saying Jimmy Hoffa is missing, and he was last seen at the Machus Red Fox. And my dad goes, like hell, we saw him at the Raleigh house. Like he was mad. My reaction was, I thought, well, maybe the news got the wrong restaurant or something. No big deal. But they went on. The story was more about a missing person than anything else. There's no mention of any other details about a car or driver, just that he was last seen at the Machus Red Fox. There's still a couple of witnesses that haven't shown up yet either. This is brand new information. The missing wasn't reported until the 31st, when they discovered his car at the Red Fox abandoned, and Josephine and Lintow had reported it to the Bloomfield Township Police. And also the FBI wasn't involved. So I did finally ask them what happened, and they told me about seeing the car and who was driving and where it went and the garbage truck, and that had to have been Hoffa on the back seat and the floorboard. And so I said, okay. So he's missing. They think he was killed. Then several days later, of course the news is on every day about Hoffa missing. Nobody's talking about him being murdered or anything like that. But 5 days, I think it was on 5 days later, James Hoffa Jr. gets a ransom call saying that they had Hoffa, and then the FBI is called in on the case 5 days after the fact. So now they're starting to find out that someone had seen the Mercury. Another person had seen O'Brien in the Mercury at the Red Fox when it pulled up. And they trace, it's a pretty unique car. They trace a Maroon Mercurty or Lincoln, but they trace it back to Joey Giacalone. And then they start to catch wind that Chuckie O'Brien was involved. So now the news is saying and showing pictures of Chuckie O'Brien. And we're watching the news several days later. This wouldn't have been until about the 5th of August. She says, that's the guy. He's the one that was driving that big car. And up until this point, she didn't know him by name. My dad would have. Even experts say that the Darby's restaurant was a hangout for the mafia. And my dad was very familiar with the union, so he would have known who Chuckie O'Brien was. He was at Hoffa's side, even according to Jack Goldsmith, the stepson. Chuckie O'Brien didn't leave his side since 1957 when he was running for Teamster president. He became his, aide, associate. So wherever he was, Chuckie O'Brien was. So to fill in a couple of blanks here, she did mention the men in the back seat had suits on. But she described Chuckie O'Brien as sideburns, long sideburns, round face, receding hairline. He was wearing a white colored shirt up to here, a high collar, but not a tie or a jacket, which incidentally matches what the FBI knew he was wearing that day. So this information comes from two eyewitnesses. They're not me saying I heard that they said that. I'm going to share the video with you. Frances telling in her own words, but this isn't being treated as a factual historical news. This is being treated as another one of those rumors. So I'll distinguish between fact and fantasy here shortly. So I'm going to compare two timelines. This would be on page 75 of the book. And it's two images I made which showed Chuckie's claimed route that he drove on the 30th, and then another one just below that that shows what his actual route would have been, having the account of the Tubmans, what they saw him go to the Raleigh house. So if we compare the two, you'll find that he had opportunities to take freeways from nearby junctions. There were on Telegraph Road, as I told you before, there's at least 4 freeway intersections where he could have hopped on a freeway to get downtown Detroit pretty quick. But just north of the Raleigh house, there's the Lodge Freeway, just a couple of blocks. So he could have hopped on the Lodge Freeway, gotten back down if he went to Joey Giacaloni's in a short amount of time. So I'm using that as his actual route. This is not going to be delving into it at this point. It's just kind of a simple presentation. Later in the book, however, I do get into other factors that apply to this time frame. And that's where I really dig into what really happened. Other witnesses in the Hoffa memo that relate to this timeline that would throw it way off. This information is really loose, but there's other witnesses that say they saw Chuckie O'Brien at the Southfield Athletic Club that day. One was right before 2:30 talking to Tony Giacaloni. Another witness said they saw Joey Giacaloni there at 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock. That was a washing machine repairman that said he saw him there. If you take those into account, that means O'Brien did go to the Southfield Athletic Club, which would fill some of that 90-minute window that the FBI couldn't fill, and that he was getting last-minute tips because it was before 3:30, and it's within minutes of the Red Fox, and maybe that's why he went there, but he didn't go inside. This was outside the entrance. Days after this event happened, I'm going to tell you in chapter 8 about Jack's car wash, and you're going to realize Chuckie O'Brien did not go to Jack's car wash that day. So let's presume later information I'm going to give you is true. That means Chuckie O'Brien and Joey went to the Southfield Athletic Club. 12 o'clock, and at 1 o'clock Joey Giacaloni is spotted. What happened with Chuckie, who knows? But he ends up being dropped off, and then whatever happens in that 3 hours happens, and then Chuckie O'Brien maybe goes back to the Southfield Athletic Club at 4 o'clock, and Joey Giacaloni gets back in the car, and then he drops Chuckie O'Brien off at Union headquarters, maybe so he can be spotted, so that's his alibi. And then the fish story ended up as part of that alibi, Jack's car wash, and Chuckie O'Brien's in the clear. Well, that's the most simple route that maybe seems the most accurate. you have witnesses that saw both of O'Brien and Joey Giacalone that day. And another one did spot O'Brien in the vicinity of the Red Fox that the FBI mentions in the Hoffa report. So, briefly, I want to address those skeptics that say, well, Hoffa would not have gotten in the car, he was at odds with Chuckie, and he wouldn't have gotten in. I say that's hogwash. I'd say the reason that car was there was so Hoffa would get in it. I don't believe Hoffa would have gotten in the Union station wagon. It would have looked too frumpy. He would have been invited into that nice-looking Mercury. And the men that were in the car, with all evidence aside, I'm going to claim Chuckie O'Brien, the driver, Jimmy Hoffa right behind him on the driver's side of the car. The other side, I believe, one of the men might have been Vito Giacalone. Vito Giacalone lost his tail that morning. The FBI had no idea where he was that day. He would have been a likely person in the car to Hoffa because he's one of them that set up the meeting. And Hoffa was still pretty trustworthy of Chuckie O'Brien because James Hoffa Jr. said his dad tried to reach him 8 times and O'Brien never returned the call. And, you know, O'Brien got married in June, just before this, to Brenda Goldsmith. And so maybe that matter was resolved to Hoffa. Now he's married, he's legitimate. Hoffa was, yeah, he did some things, but he didn't like people that drank or gambled as to be doing that sort of thing. So I believe Hoffa was more than willing to get in the car with O'Brien. He would have gotten in the car with Vito Giacalone. He would have been impressed by the Mercury. The other fellow could have been Sally Bergiglio, like a lot of people say, because he was associated with Tony Provenzano, who was going to be one of the meeting partners. So I think it's not only likely, but to me it's obvious that Hoffa would have gotten in that car. He was seen in the car by more than the truck driver. So I want you to believe that's fact. That's not subject to other rumors. It's also in the Hoffa memo, just to say that's the evidence. Chuckie O'Brien admits to driving the car all day long. Everybody's convinced about it, except for his stepson. His stepson believed Lintau's story about the 3:30 call, and that became the premise of the whole plausible excuse that Hoffa couldn't have been in the car. We know he was in the car. When they eventually got the car on August 9th, they had evidence of a 3-inch long hair, and the hair had skin and blood traces on it. They didn't have DNA at the time till years later, but they kept that evidence and tested it for DNA, and it came out conclusive. It was Hoffa that was in the car. They had trained dogs that ran through 3 different trained dogs that went through it from different locations around the country, well renowned as far as being scent dogs. From a pair of boxer shorts, they traced his scent to the back seat area of the Mercury. Although it might have, the scent might have wafted into the trunk, they said the dogs weren't. The dog's reactions indicated he was not in the trunk, but it had just wafted in, like I said. They didn't see fluids in there that indicated Hoffa was killed in the car. Now, he might have been strangled, but I don't think he was killed, or he would have expelled natural human fluids that I think would have permeated the carpet fibers. If they got a 3-inch long hair, I think that kind of evidence would have been there too, especially since the car was cleaned out at Jack's Car Wash. I do believe it was. I just don't believe it was on the 30th. Again, that's in chapter 8. So I'm going to leave it there for now. I've shared what's in the book as far as Hoffa's timeline, O'Brien's timeline, and the Tubman's timeline. And I've got some more to say with that, but I want to keep this simple for now. The last part of the book is going to introduce you to the FBI interview in 2006, years later, decades later, when I convinced my mother to come forward with the story. I thought it was solved, so did she, and my dad had passed, and she felt it she wasn't afraid of these men anymore as long as, and when she spoke to the FBI about it, she was in Detroit, I was on the West Coast, that they didn't wear hats when they came to the door. This thing about hats, this was just melded in her mind. And so, although it's mentioned, I don't know the men in the back seat had hats on, but they did coif their hair up that could have appeared as hats. She was focused more on the commotion going on and the intense glaring back and forth with the driver, Chuckie O'Brien. So the fact they're wearing hats, I think, is incidental, but I don't want to gloss over that without addressing it. I never saw the transcript, by the way, until 2009. So 2009 is again another chapter where I talk about calling Barbara Ann Crancer and recording the video, which I'm going to share with you next in the next segment.